The golden sunset painted the sky over Bar Harbor, Maine, in breathtaking hues of amber and rose, casting long shadows across the peaceful streets where everyone knew each other by name. In this tight-knit community, Father Anthony had become a beacon of hope and compassion, his weathered cassock as familiar a sight as the lobster boats bobbing in the harbor. His small parish office, filled with the scent of old books and brewing coffee, had become a sanctuary for those seeking solace. The walls, adorned with children's drawings and thank-you notes, told stories of countless lives touched by his gentle wisdom. Father Anthony's eyes, warm and understanding, had witnessed both joy and sorrow, yet his faith in humanity remained unshaken. One particularly busy afternoon, as he finished counseling a young couple struggling with their relationship, Margaret Wheeler, a longtime parishioner and local business owner, noticed the fatigue in his eyes. "Father," she said, her voice filled with concern, "when was the last time you took a break?" The question caught him off guard, and he couldn't remember. Margaret leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light streaming through the stained glass windows. "I have a suggestion," she said, pulling out a business card from her purse. "My friend owns the Golden Spoon in Portland. It's one of the finest restaurants in Maine. You deserve an evening of excellent food and peaceful atmosphere." Father Anthony started to protest, but Margaret wouldn't hear it. "You've given so much to our community," she insisted. "Let us give something back to you." Her determination, coupled with genuine concern, made it difficult for him to refuse. After careful consideration, he agreed, believing that perhaps a short respite would help him serve his community better. The following evening, as Father Anthony prepared for his journey to Portland, he couldn't shake off a strange feeling of anticipation. His simple black cassock, though clean and pressed, had seen better days, but he had never given much thought to appearances. His focus had always been on the essence of people, not their outer shell. The drive to Portland was peaceful, the coastal road offering spectacular views of the Atlantic Ocean. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the highway, Father Anthony reflected on his years of service. Each mile marker seemed to bring back memories of the lives he'd touched, the marriages he'd blessed, the troubled souls he'd counseled. Little did he know that this simple dinner reservation would become a turning point, not just in his life, but in the lives of many others. As he approached the city limits of Portland, the modest buildings of Bar Harbor gave way to more sophisticated architecture. The Golden Spoon stood proudly in the heart of the city's historic district, its elegant facade illuminated by tasteful lighting. Parking his aged vehicle among the luxury cars that lined the street, Father Anthony took a deep breath. The restaurant's windows glowed with warm light, and through them, he could see the shimmer of crystal chandeliers and the gleam of fine china. As he stepped out of his car, the cool evening breeze carried the subtle sounds of classical music and refined conversation. Standing before the restaurant's impressive entrance, Father Anthony straightened his collar and offered a quiet prayer. He had no way of knowing that behind those ornate doors, an evening awaited that would challenge his patience, test his principles, and ultimately prove that true worth lies not in the clothes one wears or the company one keeps, but in the content of one's character. The maitre d' glanced up from his leather-bound reservation book, his carefully composed expression faltering for a moment as he took in Father Anthony's appearance. The pristine marble floors of the Golden Spoon's entrance reflected the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, creating a stark contrast with the priest's humble attire. "Reservation for Anthony Collins," the priest said quietly, maintaining his dignified demeanor despite the growing discomfort. The maitre d' paused, his fingers hovering over the page as if hoping the name would somehow disappear. Finally, with a barely concealed sigh, he gestured to a junior staff member. "Table 17, he muttered, "the one near the service entrance." As Father Anthony followed the hostess through the dining room, the subtle buzz of conversation dimmed. Heads turned, and whispers followed in his wake. Ladies in designer dresses leaned closer to their companions, while gentlemen in tailored suits made no attempt to hide their disapproving glances. The table he was led to sat in a shadowed corner, partially obscured by a large potted plant. The hostess didn't bother with the usual flourish of pulling out his chair or presenting the menu with a smile. Instead, she placed the leather-bound menu on the table with a quiet thud and retreated quickly. Among the staff, only one person seemed to view the scene differently. Sarah Chen, a young waitress working her way through college, observed the priest with growing interest. She noticed how he maintained his composure despite the cold reception, how his eyes remained kind even as others turned away in disdain. The senior waiter, Maxwell, approached Father Anthony's table with visible reluctance. "Good evening," he said, his tone carrying a hint of sarcasm. "I trust you've had time to review our extensive wine list?" His emphasis on extensive carried clear implications about the prices. "Just water, thank you," Father Anthony replied calmly. "And I'll have the house special." Maxwell's lips twitched. The house special is the aged Wagyu ribeye with truffle butter. Perhaps something more appropriate to your station? The insult hung in the air like a heavy cloud. A child from a nearby table, fascinated by Father Anthony's collar, started to approach him with innocent curiosity. Her parents, alarmed, quickly called her back, shooting apologetic glances to the surrounding tables as if their daughter's interest in the priest had somehow disrupted the evening's refinement. In the far corner of the restaurant, partially hidden by a wine display, sat Thomas Richardson, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. His attention had been drawn to the unfolding scene, and unlike the other patrons, his expression held no judgment, only intense interest and what appeared to be recognition. Sarah, unable to stand idle any longer, approached Father Anthony's table under the pretense of refilling his water. As she did so, she quietly slipped a folded note beside his napkin. The message was simple but sincere: "I'm sorry for how you're being treated. Not everyone here has forgotten their humanity." As the evening progressed, Father Anthony's attention was drawn to a particular photograph on the wall near his table. The black and white image showed the restaurant in its early days, and something about it stirred a memory, one that would soon prove significant in ways none of the current patrons could imagine. The black and white photograph that had caught Father Anthony's attention showed the Golden Spoon's grand opening in 1962. Among the crowd stood a familiar face, Thomas Richardson's father, William, alongside a group of working-class families. The restaurant, Father Anthony realized, had originally been founded as a place where people from all walks of life could share a meal together. Sarah noticed Father Anthony's interest in the photograph and approached his table again. "That was taken during the restaurant's first year," she said softly, taking advantage of a moment when Maxwell was occupied with other tables. "My grandmother told me it used to be different here. More welcoming." Thomas Richardson continued to observe the scene from his corner, his hands clasped tightly around his water glass. His mind wandered back to a rainy night 15 years ago when he had lost everything: his business, his reputation, his sense of purpose. He had found himself at a small parish in Bar Harbor, where a kind priest had offered him not just comfort, but practical help and wisdom that had transformed his life. As Father Anthony's meal arrived, deliberately different from what he had ordered, Maxwell couldn't resist another subtle jab. "I took the liberty of selecting something more budget-conscious," he said, placing a plate of plain pasta before the priest. "We wouldn't want to burden the church's finances." The surrounding tables tittered with quiet laughter, but Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment. She hurried to the kitchen, where she confronted the chef about the switch. The chef, however, merely shrugged. "Orders from management," he said. "Can't have his kind bringing down the tone of the place." Meanwhile, a well-dressed couple at a nearby table began speaking loudly about the decline of standards and fine dining establishments. Their voices carried deliberately across the room, making it clear their comments were directed at Father Anthony's presence. Other diners nodded in agreement, while a few looked uncomfortable but remained silent. The tension in the restaurant continued to build as Father Anthony calmly ate his meal. A young businessman in an expensive suit walked past his table, deliberately bumping it and causing water to spill. Instead of apologizing, the man smirked and adjusted his designer watch, making sure everyone noticed its gleam under the chandelier lights. Throughout it all, Father Anthony maintained his dignity, treating each slight with the same gentle patience he showed his parishioners. He couldn't help but recall the words of his mentor from seminary: "The true test of faith isn't in how we treat those who are kind to us, but in how we respond to those who aren't." Sarah, moved by his quiet strength, began to remember stories her grandmother had told her about the Golden Spoon's early days. The restaurant had once been a place that brought the community together, where dock workers and bank executives could share a meal side by side. Something had changed over the years, transforming it into a symbol of exclusivity and prejudice. Thomas Richardson finally stood up from his table, his decision made. As he straightened his tie and prepared to approach Father Anthony, a commotion near the kitchen caught everyone's attention. The restaurant's owner, Charles Montgomery III, had arrived for his nightly inspection, his presence adding another layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. Charles Montgomery III swept through his restaurant like a cold winter wind, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the marble floor. He paused briefly at each table, exchanging pleasantries with regular patrons while carefully assessing every detail of their dining experience. His carefully crafted world of exclusivity and privilege was his pride and joy, though it bore little resemblance to his father's original vision for the Golden Spoon. As Montgomery approached Father Anthony's corner, his face darkened. The priest's presence was an unwelcome reminder of something he'd spent years trying to forget. He gestured for Maxwell to join him, engaging in a whispered conversation that drew curious glances from nearby diners. Sarah, watching from her service station, felt her heart race as she saw Montgomery's expression. She had worked at the Golden Spoon for 3 years, saving money for college, and had never seen the owner quite so agitated. She clutched the old photograph she had removed from the wall earlier, debating whether to reveal what she had discovered in her grandmother's attic last week. Thomas Richardson chose this moment to make his move. With measured steps, he approached Father Anthony's table, commanding attention with his presence. The restaurant fell silent as he stopped before the priest, who looked up with quiet recognition in his eyes. "Father Anthony," Thomas's voice carried clearly across the hushed dining room, "I've been waiting 15 years to thank you properly." He extended his hand, not to shake, but to present a worn, folded piece of paper, a check for $50,000 that the priest had written to help save Thomas's business years ago, when he had nothing left. Montgomery's face paled as he watched the scene unfold. Thomas Richardson was not just any diner, he was now one of the most influential businessmen in Portland, and his voice carried weight in circles that Montgomery desperately wanted to impress. This man, Thomas continued, his voice thick with emotion, sold his own car and emptied his savings account to help a stranger he found sitting in his church one rainy night. He never asked for recognition or repayment. He simply said, "Sometimes we must be the miracle others are praying for." Sarah stepped forward, unable to contain herself any longer. She held up the old photograph she had been hiding. "Mr. Montgomery, I found this in my grandmother's things last week, along with letters from your father." Her hands trembled slightly as she continued, "The Golden Spoon was created to be a place where everyone would be welcome, where good food could bring people together across social boundaries." The other diners began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier disdain giving way to shame as they watched the scene unfold. The young businessman who had bumped Father Anthony's table earlier slipped quietly toward the exit, leaving his half-finished meal behind. Father Anthony remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap, as the truth of his connection to the Golden Spoon began to emerge. He had never intended for this evening to become a lesson in humanity, but sometimes the greatest teachings come from unexpected moments. Sarah's hands steadied as she began to read from one of the yellowed letters she had discovered. "My dearest Elizabeth," she recited, "today we opened the Golden Spoon with a simple dream, to create a place where food could bridge the divisions in our society." A young priest blessed our opening, reminding us that true hospitality knows no boundaries. Charles Montgomery III's composed facade cracked as he recognized his father's handwriting. The letter continued to reveal how the original Father Anthony, the current Father Anthony's uncle and namesake, had not only blessed the restaurant, but had also been instrumental in securing its initial funding through the church's community support program. Thomas Richardson stepped closer to the center of the room, his presence commanding attention. "But there's more to this story," he announced, looking directly at Montgomery. "When your father fell ill, it was the younger Father Anthony who spent nights by his bedside in the hospital. He was there during your father's final days, when you were too busy with business meetings to visit. The revelation hit Montgomery like a physical blow. He remembered those days, though he had tried to forget them. His absence during his father's illness had been one of his deepest regrets, one he had buried beneath years of focusing on success and social status. Your father's last wish, Father Anthony spoke for the first time, his voice gentle but clear, was for the Golden Spoon to remain true to its original purpose. He asked me to watch over his legacy, but I could only observe from afar as the restaurant changed. He stood slowly, drawing all eyes to him. I came here tonight not to shame anyone, but because a kind parishioner thought I needed a break. Perhaps it was divine providence that brought us all together this evening. Sarah stepped forward again, revealing more documents from her grandmother's collection. Among them was the original deed to the restaurant, which specified that a portion of its profits should always be dedicated to community service. This clause had been quietly ignored for years after the elder Montgomery's passing. The other diners, who had previously looked down on Father Anthony, now sat in uncomfortable silence. The weight of judgment had shifted, and many found themselves questioning their own behavior. Maxwell, the haughty waiter, stood frozen near the kitchen doors, his earlier condescension replaced by visible shame. Charles Montgomery III slowly walked to the center of the room, stopping before the old photograph that had started this revelation. In it, he could see his father's genuine smile, the proud faces of the community members, and the original Father Anthony's blessing. The image spoke of a time when the Golden Spoon truly lived up to its name, a place where the richness of human connection outweighed the richness of its dishes. As the truth settled over the dining room like a gentle blanket, something began to shift in the atmosphere. The invisible barriers that had divided the space began to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of human connection and shared understanding. The evening had become more than just a dinner service, it had transformed into a moment of collective awakening. The following weeks brought remarkable changes to the Golden Spoon. Charles Montgomery III, deeply moved by the revelations of that pivotal night, embarked on a mission to restore his father's original vision. The restaurant underwent not just a physical transformation, but a spiritual one as well. The first change came in the form of a new policy. Every Sunday, the restaurant would offer a community-tabled dinner, where people from all walks of life could share a meal together at reduced prices. The elaborate crystal chandeliers remained, but now they illuminated faces from every social stratum, creating a warm glow that seemed to celebrate diversity rather than exclusivity. Sarah Chin was promoted to head of community outreach, a new position created to rebuild connections with local organizations. Her grandmother's precious documents became part of a historical display in the restaurant's entrance, reminding everyone of the Golden Spoon's noble origins. Maxwell, the former waiter, requested to stay on staff, humble and eager to be part of the restaurant's redemption story. Thomas Richardson became a regular patron, but not in the way one might expect. He often hosted dinners for struggling entrepreneurs, creating a space where they could find the same support he had once received from Father Anthony. The restaurant's private dining room, once reserved for celebrity guests, became a meeting place for community leaders and charitable organizations. Father Anthony continued his quiet work in Bar Harbor, but his influence remained ever present at the Golden Spoon. A small plaque beside the entrance now bore his uncle's blessing from the original opening day, along with a simple addition, "All are welcome at this table." The restaurant's profits, as originally intended, once again began flowing back into community projects. 1 month after that transformative evening, Charles Montgomery III hosted a special reopening ceremony. The guest list was unlike anything the Golden Spoon had seen in years. Business executives sat beside factory workers, students broke bread with retirees, and children filled the restaurant with their laughter. Father Anthony was given the honor of blessing the restaurant once again, his simple prayer echoing the one his uncle had offered decades before. As the evening drew to a close, Montgomery approached Father Anthony with tears in his eyes. "My father would be proud," he said quietly. "Not of what I had turned this place into, but of what it's becoming again." Father Anthony smiled, placing a gentle hand on the younger man's shoulder. "Your father's dream never died," he replied. "It was just waiting for the right moment to reawaken." The golden spoon had found its way home, transformed by an evening that began with judgment and ended with understanding. The restaurant stood as a testament to the power of humility, the strength of forgiveness, and the enduring truth that every person, regardless of their appearance or status, carries within them a dignity that deserves to be honored. The story of Father Anthony and the golden spoon spread throughout Portland and beyond, reminding people that true change often begins with a single moment of grace, and that sometimes the most powerful sermons are preached not from pulpits, but through simple acts of human dignity. End of story. Dear readers, we hope the story of Father Anthony and the golden spoon has touched your heart as it has touched others. This tale of transformation and human dignity is just one of many inspiring stories we share on our channel. To continue this journey of discovery and reflection, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Your engagement helps us bring more meaningful content to light. Join our community in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how simple acts of kindness have transformed your own life. Remember, sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single moment of understanding. Stay tuned for more stories that celebrate the beauty of human connection. Until next time.